How is media literacy education a site of struggle? That's the topic of the day. And joining me is Neil Andersen, the president of the Association for Media Literacy in Ontario, in Canada, where he lives. He has taught primary to post-secondary media studies for 30 years, including media studies, additional qualifications courses for 3 universities and the Toronto District School Board. He has delivered keynotes and workshops across Canada and in the United States, Japan, India, China, Australia, England, and Sweden. And this is how you can get in touch with him on Twitter. Okay, welcome, Neil.
Thank you.
Media literacy is coming of age as a pedagogical exercise or a tool. And yet, clearly, many questions remain. What kinds of intellectual or even practical difficulties, conflicts, and contradictions are we seeing in the delivery at these pedagogical levels? What are the expectations? Are we placing too much responsibility on the media consumer, or are we even placing enough of the responsibility? How do we know that it's effective? There is enough conflict, it looks like, in the delivery of media literacy to be called a site of struggle. So Neil, let's go with that question then. How is media literacy education a site of struggle?
Well, it's possible that that I don't know what I'm talking about, because it is such a site of struggle. There are some people who think that it's a subject. There are some people who argue that it's a discipline. Some people who argue that it's a skill set. It can, in fact, be all three of those. I've taught it as an individual subject, but I've also integrated it with all of my other teaching. And when we sit down to explain it, if I were explaining it to you and you didn't know anything about media literacy, that could get to be very confusing very quickly. Right now, we are promoting an integrated use of media literacy. We feel that it integrates beautifully with all other subjects, and for very good reasons, because all subjects use media in their instruction, and therefore all subjects should address that use of media. We talk about something called through and about, which is a bit of a derivative from Marshall McLuhan, who said that the medium is the message. And we think that when we teach using media, we need to take a pause, whether we're using a YouTube video or using a graphic organizer, whatever it happens to be. And we need to talk about the medium itself, because we need to understand media in order to understand their effects on things. Also, we see people claiming to teach media or media literacy when I'm not sure they really are, or at least it's not foregrounded. Sometimes they're using media literacy to teach other ideas. It might be drug addiction, it might be teenage pregnancy, it might be civics, but that's their foreground teaching. Their background teaching is that they have to teach some media literacy to do that. And that's another way that it can become a site of struggle. A further way that it can be considered a site of struggle has to do with the fact that a lot of people, teachers and teaching teachers, are loath to engage with media literacy. And I think this has to do with the contentious nature. Popular culture, by and large, deals with contentious issues. That's what makes it popular. That's what makes it attractive. That's why we enjoy it. So there's a certain level of violence, a certain level of sex, a certain level of other kind of exciting things that make pop culture exciting, but they can also make them dangerous to deal with in the classroom, because it's difficult to teach when emotions are high. And so I heard about a middle school teacher who found that she could no longer teach current events, which is really sad for obvious reasons, but also current events tends to be a highlight of the middle school curriculum. And she was finding that there were fights breaking out in her classroom the minute they started to talk about current events. So it's because people have been or are radicalized but also that they are not somehow able to take a step back and look more critically and to apply critical thinking. They're just blowing right through the critical thinking to an emotional. And sadly, this particular teacher had to abandon that, which means that she was also abandoning a level of media literacy learning at the same time. So we have to really acknowledge these personal biases and the way that they might interfere with critical thinking. And this is something that's been specifically addressed, and I think very, very well by George Lakoff, who's suggesting that critical thinking is in fact imperiled because it is overrun by other things, that we have to understand our own human biases, yours and mine. You and I are men. We would have to consider those those biases that come with the baggage and the legacy of being men, and how that might influence the way that we think. It's a real struggle to try to think our way through it. Not impossible, but it's a struggle that we have to be aware of, that we have to appreciate, and then we have to somehow use and go through. So these are some of the things that make it a site of struggle.
The one word I didn't hear you use, which was intriguing to me, was reconcile, which is it the media literacy pedagogies or education's job to reconcile these maybe different kinds of positions, and those that seem to be increasingly becoming, more and more, I want to say extreme, but the gap seems to be widening. Right? Is it the media literacy? Is it the job of media literacy to reconcile it?
I think it probably is. I'm heavily influenced by Marshall McLuhan. Our organization is based on the thinking and the teaching of Marshall McLuhan. And he was suggesting that most of media are invisible. What we tend to do is we see the effects of media, but we don't necessarily see the media themselves. And therefore, I think we, as media literacy educators, have to take a larger view, a more global view of things, but also I think we have to acknowledge the personal responses, the physiological responses we take to media. So for instance, we are talking about social media continuously, and this is a very hot topic right now. But I think we have to acknowledge that social media is disintegrating as much as it is integrating. And I think a lot of people aren't considering that. They're all saying, oh, well, social media brings people together, and social media gives them a platform where they can discuss and work things out. And of course, crowdsourcing is very useful for so many of us. But at the same time, I think there are effects of social media that are actually disintegrating. For instance, when I'm in social media, and you and I are participating in that right now, my seeing you on this screen is great because you're at a distance and I have never met you, and now we have an opportunity to get together. At the same time, my seeing you is a constant reminder of the you that I am not seeing. I don't see you in 3 dimensions. I don't see you in high quality. And therefore, it's a reminder of what I don't have that I might have if you and I were sitting across from one another at a table. And I think that we have to consider those physiological impacts. I think that social media, for instance, can be extremely lonely depending on who we are and how we're using it. And I think we have to consider those physiological impacts in addition to the others. And I think oftentimes we tend to focus on one without looking at the other. And one of the things that I'm very grateful to Marshall McLuhan for is to try to be multiple perspective viewing when I'm looking at things, and look from different points of view and consider different things. And I think that's really actually one of media literacy's gifts to thinking and into education, is this multiple perspective point of view.
Neil, thank you very much for your insight. That seems to be all the time we have.